strategies. All right, welcome back. We are COMP1011 in the summer 2022 semester at Georgian College. It's week 9, part 2 of our broadcast. And we just finished talking about serializing, deserializing objects using Json, which is kind of a little utility we've picked up, and what serialization is, deserialization means a little bit, what JSON data is, and a bunch of other stuff. We've modified our vector2d class to make it so that it's pretty when it serializes. That's what we've done. And we've created a couple of methods that are static methods here at the bottom for serializing to JSON and deserializing from JSON data, which is pretty cool. Now what we want to do is we want to use our class here. We want to use our object to save a file or open a file. And right now what save file does is it saves a data file that comes from the SQL database, and opens a file from the and converts it into objects we can read. Okay, so let's take a look at what we already have before we move on to what we want to do. Okay, so going back to my file chooser controller from last week, what we did was last week we have a save to file and a read from file method. And the save to file method, we use a very simple formatter in order for us to save to the file path that we want to use. Okay, so I kind of want to use this same formatter from an output perspective to save our data to a file. And remember, what we can do is we are getting a list of data. So this is save to JSON is kind of what we want to do. So let's make that that function. So save to file is one thing, and save JSON to file is something else we want to do, or save file as JSON, kind of stuff. Save data as JSON or something like that would be nice. So let's do that. So we'll say, notice that these files are little helper files, right? That's what they do. And the way they're activated is we actually use a show file dialog. Depending on the dialog type, we open up a file chooser from last week, and we decided to we have a little switch case, and the switch case either opens a file or saves a file, which is kind of cool. It changes the names of everything. We're going to do something similar to this today, but in this case, instead of just taking our data and doing something with it, let's see what we can do with an array list of data. Okay, so let's do that first. So again, we'll make a brand new method. So private, and we'll say void, and we'll say something like save data or JSON data to file. Save JSON data to file. So that's our new function. Okay, and we'll also have a read JSON data from file. So that's what we'll do down here. So let's make another private void, and we'll call this read JSON data from file. Okay, those are our two little stubs we've created. So save JSON data to file. How does this look? So I do want to copy paste a little bit here. And we're going to still do the formatter. The active file path is something that I want to be able to modify. That's true still, right? An array list of data from the database. That's what this DB manager does. Nice. And it sorts the data. This is sorted data, okay, that we get. And what we want to do is we want to convert this data now for every object before we format it outwards, right? Is there a way to write our data to a file? So I want to kind of save our data to a file. And, how do we do that? Okay, so I want to be able to, almost like I want to save our data to a file. And how would I do that? Is it possible, for me to do this with the way that I have it here? What do you recommend? What do you think, guys? I want you to think about this. So here's our saved JSON data. We don't have it as JSON data right now. It's just vector2d data. That's our vector2d data. That's what it is, right? So I take my vector2d data and I can sort it, and it's whatever I want, okay? And vector2d data is an array list, and I can do a for each loop or a ranged for loop. And for every vector2d in the vector2d data, I'm going to output this thing as an object, right? Output.format. What about if and then here, notice I even said the word serialize last week. What if I want to use the formatter right here, and I want to save the data, as an example, to a file? Reading data from a file, that's one thing, but it's almost like I want to be able to do a writer, a special kind of writer. And Gson might provide that for us. Let's do some exploring, okay, here as an example. So we have some IO, right? But I want to do some importing here instead. So I'm going to say import, and we want to do our com.google.json, and I want to do stream. And notice that there are a couple of helper functions, a Json Reader and a Json Writer. Okay, this is actually built into the Json thing, so we don't have to do some serialization ourselves. I mean, we can do a lot of work by ourselves and figure it out, or we can just use our Json Writer. And let's also do the same thing, and let's include import.com.google.json.stream. kind of a Json Reader. All right, so we have a reader and a writer. Okay, so when we use our Json Writer, right, I want to go to JSON. That's what I want to do. And I want to have a target of where it's going to write to. So it's almost like, and remember, we don't know how Json Reader and Writer work right now. I'm just I'm doing some exploring, and I'm trying to figure out with you, right, how this might work. Well, here's how the reading might work. Okay, let's just do the reading first, because reading is a lot easier than writing in a lot of ways. And I'm going to come back to the saving to JSON data in a second. We definitely want to use something like this. It might be slightly different than what we're seeing here in terms of formatting. Do I really want to format the data? And the answer is, well, probably not. Okay, so I probably don't want to format the data here. I want the data to be formatted by Json itself, because it doesn't need to be formatted out like this, right? I mean, I could certainly use this and ignore any formatting at all, right? And just put it out there, right? So I could do that. And I can just, it's going to be a string type that I'm outputting, because that's what the Json format gives me. It gives me outputting as a string. So I could definitely do that. But maybe if I read JSON from a file, let's think about you doing it in a different way than what we've shown you already. So file reading and file writing, we've done it with our scanner, and we did it from, we did it with the formatter, but we can also import something else where I want to import my file reader itself, file reader and file writer, right? So let's go, notice that there's a file, I can do file here, but what if I wanted to say import.java.io, if I go .file, notice there's a file reader and a file writer. Let's add those in there too. Right now they're not being used, but I just want to point this out that file reader and file writer are there. So file reader is what we're going to use first, and then we'll look up file writer and see how we can do it. And I want to see, first of all, the writing or the reading of data, again, always easier than the writing of data in many ways. Okay, so how do I do this thing, and how do I do this? So first, what we want to do is we want to create, typically what we want to do is we want to create a JSON object, right? But in this case, we don't have a JSON object, right? the JSON objects are part of our vector 2D, so we don't need to do that. So we would normally, I'll put this in there, normally we need a JSON object, right? But we don't have to do that anymore because we have it already, okay? That's what I said. We want to do a try catch, but a special try catch like we've done before. Oops, undo. A special try catch that we've done before. So I want to do a try catch. When I frame it in a try catch, okay? And the special try catch we're going to do for the reading part is going to look a little different than what we've seen, because before we use formatter, and this time we won't use formatter, we'll use the file reader. Okay, and the way to do that would be, hey, file reader. I'm going to make a new file reader directly. So here's a new file reader, different way of doing things. All right, I'm going to pass in the active file path, whatever the active file path is. And then I'm going to say, hey, Json Reader, I want to create a new Json Reader object that is the new Json Reader, and I want to pass in the file reader stream. So the file reader stream, I've created it to pass into the Json Reader. That's why I needed the file reader in the first place. Okay, and I'm just going to format this so that it looks nice, so that you guys can see it a little bit better. So this is the header of the JSON, the try object, right? We're trying to open up a file, okay? And then what we want to do is we want to convert our JSON objects into some kind of you know, because remember, we're reading the file. This is the Json Reader. So what does it give me, the Json Reader itself? When I use from JSON, right? From JSON means I'm getting stuff, you know, I'm reading a string. That's what it is. And then what I want to do is I want to take that string, and it's made up of more than one potential object. So read many vector 2Ds from the JSON file. That's what I want to do, okay? So that's what I'd like to do. But using the Json Reader, we're going to look up Json Reader, how it works in a second. And we're going to convert, or we're going to deserialize, just to use the proper word, deserialize, you know, each vector 2D and store the results in an array list. That's what I want to do. Okay. So we could do, I want to kind of, you know, open up everything. And let's take a look at Json Reader and what that does for us before we do this. This is kind of like our little stub, if you will. If this is the way we read stuff, then it goes to form that if we're going to do the same thing here, I'm just going to copy paste just to give us our little handler here. Here's our readers. I'm just going to try and put this out there for you guys. And then here's our writer. So save to, well, it's going to be probably very similar. So instead of my file reader, right, then we'll make this our file writer. Wouldn't this be the same? Wouldn't this be nice if we did this? File writer. Oh. And here's the active file path, right? And all of a sudden, well, let me do this right. Wow. Okay, so that's what I want to do, make a file writer, and then Json Reader would turn into Json Writer. This is Json Writer. And this is Json Writer. So again, I'm just kind of putting this out there to you. Json file writer. So file writer, right? And in this case, instead of reading, we would write many vector objects, from an array list, right, to JSON organized file, JSON to JSON file. That's what we want to do, right? So that's kind of how I want to do it. Save to JSON, and I can use a file writer and a file reader, right, in order for me to do that. Let's take a look. Let's look up Json Writer and Json Reader from our documentation. So again, up here, let's see if we have something like that. And if not, we're going to see it up online. So it says, okay, using Gson, we have other examples: serializing, writing, an instance creator, Json field naming support, streaming, sharing state across custom serializers. It says writing a custom serializer into serializer. We don't have to do this because we want to be able to use Json Reader and Json Writer, but it's not here. Okay, so it doesn't give us that in here at all, the Json stuff. Okay, interesting. So that's not there, right? Okay, maybe if I look it up, if I say something like Json file, Json Reader, right? Example. There we go. So I want to read from a file. How to do it? So streaming JSON parser, so Json Reader, and we have our stuff, and it shows us that we have a Json Reader. We make a new Json Reader when we pass in a string reader, or in this case, as an example, a file reader. These are the things we can use: the file reader, a file writer. We can use all of these kinds of readers to do it. We can read a JSON stream, which is what we're kind of doing. So there's the new stream. And we can say, well, Json Reader has next, where there's more stuff to do, right? There's our Json Reader. We could do this. What we want to do is, they're just giving us a long example on how to convert, but we want to use a JSON object, right, to convert the object from the file, right, into something that we can use. Okay. By the way, finally is something we never used, where we want to close off a reader and a file, right, and it shows us what the token, and which is the key value pairs. You can see the key value pairs for all of this particular data. All right, so here's an example of it. We found it up online, right? So that's definitely one way of doing it. Okay, and it'd be nice if we had, kind of, something here. So Json Reader from javadoc.io. Okay, well, that is making me more comfortable, right? Because, and I want to go with 2.9, which is the latest version, right? So I want to go with Json Reader and Json Writer here. Okay, well, this is Json Stream. So that gives me Json Reader and Json Writer. Let's do the Json Reader first. Maybe it'll give us an example. Okay, so we have some data. They've given us some data. Suppose we'd like to parse a stream of message such as this, right? And it says we have the code implements the parser for the above structure. So read JSON stream is what they've called it, a public. It returns a list of type message. That's what it does. And it reads JSON stream. Here's our input stream in, throws an IO exception, no problem. Here's our Json Reader. We use our JSON in, no problem. And we try and return read messages array, which is what they've created, and finally close the reader. Okay, so you want to be able to do that. So what does read message array look like? Let's take a look here. So hey, this is exactly what we want to do. We want to make a new array list of type vector2d. That's what we want to do. When we read it in, we say reader begin array, right? And because reader is an object up here, right? So we want to begin array while the reader has something to read. We can add to the object, and we can end the reader messages, read message, read message.reader. Read message is this. Here's how they put it together. And they've broken it down they've broken it down so that each object, as an example, is something that we can read from. So Json Reader, we pass in the read message, and we create a list, and we start reading it in. Okay, so this is definitely something that we could do when we read it in, but it'd be nice if we can use our tools that we already have, because we already have a to JSON and from JSON. So whenever we do this, when we do a, just to point it out to you, has next, that's going to give us a string. So maybe this is kind of what we want to do. Now it says reader.beginArray, reader.endArray. And just to say what that reader is a new JSON object, okay, with JSON Reader object. So we already have this kind of idea here. Let's try it. So let's do the reader from file first. So let's do that. So read JSON from file. Here's our file. And like it says here in our documentation, right? What we want to do is we want to make a list, an array list of vector2d. So let's do that. So first we'll make a vector2d list. And we'll do that here. So we'll say an array list of vector2d, which we're going to call vectors, is going to be a new vector2d array list of vector2ds. Okay. So first we make the object. This makes it, so create an empty list. Okay. And then what we want to do is we want to build up this list, right? That's what we want to build up. And we want to add, while we're reading the JSON file, right? We want to convert it to a vector, recreate the vector, and add that vector to the list. So while JSON Reader, and notice it says has next Boolean, has int, has double, and so on. And by the way, you can also go next long, next name, next string, right? So we want to say has next while there's more to read from, right? What I want to do is as I'm reading the file, right? As I want to read the file, I want to I can do a couple things, right? The JSON Reader is for each one. While it does it, I'm reading each line of the JSON Reader, and I want to convert it, right? So how do I get that object, right? Because if I look back here, while I'm reading it, right, then I want to read something, read the read message. I want to get that reader, and whatever that reader is, that's the thing I'm going to add into the message. Okay, well, if reader is an array, if it's a string, then what we want to do is we want to say that Json want to take that vector2d dot from JSON that we created. We pass in the string, which is the reader. Okay, so we want to pass in that reader, right? And that's what we want. We want to be able to take that reader, and we want to convert it from that thing. I want to take that in and read message. Notice read messages takes in a JSON reader. And then the JSON reader, what it does is while the reader, that's what they call it, has next, goes through the list, goes through this this thing. And it basically what it says is it kind of reader.next name, and it kind of deserializes it like this. Okay, so that's definitely a way of doing it. But it'd be really nice if we didn't have to do this, right? But instead, we took the whole JSON Reader thing and tried to convert it, take the JSON Reader and convert it itself into a vector2d. That's the kind of stuff I want to be able to do. I want to take that. It's almost like I want to use a new JSON object. So I'm I'm just trying to picture it with you guys as I'm working. So here's Json. If I didn't have the vector 2D, I want to say Json is equal to a new Json object, right? And what I want to do as I'm reading stuff is I want to be able to maybe not even use the while loop, and I want to be able to do something like this: Json dot from Json, and I'm going to read in. I'm going to use the Json Reader, and I want to kind of create a type that I want to return things back into. I want to kind of convert things into some kind of thing. I can't do this because a vector 2D itself dot class is not exactly what I'm doing, right? That's kind of, I'm reading the whole Json Reader, and I want to read this back in. And notice what it says is when I do a from Json this way, right, what it returns is a type. So that's what it's returning back out. Okay, it's returning that type back out. And it'd be nice if I can do it in one blow like this, okay, as opposed to like looping through. I want to read the entire file. So the entire file itself is going to read in, and it's going to array itself in some kind of fashion. It'd be nice if I could do that. I can't, okay, because the file doesn't know what to do, right? I'm reading one line at a time. So again, I'm kind of doing what I did before. When I did it before, I kind of did input.hasNext from my object. So this is kind of the same thing, hasNext input. And then I get my input, right? And it's kind of the same thing. So I want to be able to do the same thing. So while my Json Reader has next, so I have something next, there's the next line, the next line, the next line. That's what it is. I want to be able to take that information from the Json Reader and do something with it. Now, what it recommends in the comments is some kind of, the ability for me to convert it into this thing. What it does is it actually returns out a proper vector 2D object. That's what it does. So it doesn't use the Json, from Json to do it, right? It actually does it long form, and it converts every single one. It kind of goes through each of the names for the next name and the next name and the next name. It tries to read the entire thing out, reader dot next, and tries to read it in. So wouldn't it be nice, instead of what we're doing here, to kind of take that Json Reader and then pass in the next name or something like that, because the next string or the next name or whatever, next name gives me the entire thing. So if I was to read this next name stuff, and if I was to read this, let's just see what it does by itself. Okay, so I want to take that next name and I want to output it to the system. So this is the way I would explore this. So system.out.println, and I want to take that object and let's see what we see with it every single time. So that's what it's going to do. I want to call the read JSON data from file, right? But I need a file to read from. So let's make one, okay? Let's make a temporary file for testing purposes. So how do I do it? Well, I want to right click and I want to make a new file. And I want to call this file something like vector2d.json. And the JSON file has to have that format, which looks like this, okay? And remember, when I output the file, when I write to a JSON file, it's got to be organized in the right way too. I want to kind of organize it so that, remember, it's going to be an array list, okay? So going back to what we had here in our user guide, it says I have primitives examples, I have arrays examples, and I have collections examples. Let's see what my collections examples would look like. So here is an array, and it says I want to take ints, and I want to convert it to this. This is nice, and it'd be nice if I can have an array of objects. So can I convert an array of objects, as an example, and what does this look like when I write to it? So let's make a very simple, so this is kind of a 2JSON where it kind of creates an array of integers, but it'd be nice if we had an array of vectors. All right, that would be nice if we can do that. So that's how it would work. We can just pass it into the 2JSON method, and it would just create that collection. And when I read it in, then I want to make a collection type. And this, notice it uses a generic to do that. And the collection type, notice it says type, collection type is equal to new type token, where we pass in the collection of type integers, right? It'd be nice if we had an array list, the ability for us to read it into an array list by default, right? As opposed to just like some generic type. Because we're going to have to do that somehow, right? We're going to somehow, making a custom serializer into serializer. Yes, we could do that. What about arrays? Because remember, we can always convert our array list to an array, right? We can do that too. So here's an array type. So here's our array, ABC. Here's a string array. And I can convert it to a string, and I can convert it to that. But what about if I convert it to, when I read it back in, so I deserialize from this, and I can say that this is a class, an int array class, and I'm reading it back in. So this is kind of what I want to do when I deserialize. I want to be able to do this, okay? How do I write it out? So writing in and writing out, I want to be able to do the same thing here, but I want to get some help in order for me to do this first. And you'll see what I'm talking about, why I'm going, chicken and the egg when I'm talking about this. So my file chooser, when I do my writer, here's my reader, and here's my writer. I want to write this out. How would this look? Well, just like it shows me here, I want to create an array list first and save JSON data to file. Well, I have an array list, right? I have an array list from my, database. So here's my array list. We can say that array list of type vector2ds is vectors, and that's equal to a new array list of vector2ds, right? Or we can say, hey, DB manager dot instance dot read vector table dot instance dot read vector table, right? There's our read vector table, and it's going to store all the vectors in here. And then I want to convert for each one. I want to convert them into, I want to create this. Can I make this to this vectors dot, I want to make it to array. I can create this to array. I can make this. I can convert it to an array. I can certainly do that. And if I convert it to an array, then it says that the toArray method returns a object array, right? Object array of type vectors. That's what it's going to do, right? And we know that we have a way of writing arrays out, right? So an array of those things, and that's the 2JSON thing, Json.2JSON and the array. Okay, cool. Do that. So again, what I would do is up here, I would create a Json object. Follow me here, is equal to a new Json object. And then what I would say is I want to take this array data, the array that I'm getting, and this vectors array, I want to say that Json.2JSON, and I want to take that vectors array and use that as something that I'm going to do. There's my vectors array. And of course, this is going to return a string. So I want to output that. I want to output this to the console. So I'm going to do system.out.println, and I want to get that information here. Okay. And in my finally, by the way, finalies are something that you can add in as well. Finally. And the finally statement always runs. That's what it does. So try catch finally. Finally basically allows me to close the file reader and the Json Writer. So I'll say Json Writer. I want to be able to close it. But the reason why we don't need finally is because of this piece. This piece here does kind of opens and closes it when we're done. But typically, if I wasn't going to use this structure, I would have to finally Json Writer and file writer close. Okay, that's what we talked about that before. Okay, so I want to do this, right? And just to test it out, I want to save to I'm going to call save to a JSON file. It's not going to actually save to a JSON file. It's just going to print it out right now when I save my file. So I'm going to say when I'm calling the save to file, which is this one, where I already have my array list. Okay, what if I, at the end of the save to file, like down here, I also save to JSON file, just to see that what this does. So it's going to call this file here, and it can run right away. I can make it run so I can see what the JSON data is going to look like. So when I go save to file, it's going to say, what file do you want to save to? vector2d.txt. It's going to overwrite this one. And when I do that, it's also going to say, cool, well, I want to be able to print it out. And now we get a bunch of errors. Okay, let's see what it does. Well, here it is. Look at this. This is the data that I want. So kind of the reason why I did all this kind of crazy stuff is because it says incomplete document, right? Because I didn't shut things down properly. And that's okay because I only wanted this piece. This is our data right here. And it's a big flat file. And so it kind of did it. It kind of did the data. It kind of converted everything over and it did it in one blow. It kind of took that data and read it, kind of took the array and read it out. And if I took this now, I don't care about the error, but if I took this data and put it in the JSON file like so, right, then that is the JSON data. And remember that this is one big flat file that I got from converting. I got this big piece of data by converting stuff inside of my, and I kind of did it in a weird way, but I did it in the file chooser. So I kind of said, let's just generate that file, which is this piece. So system.out.println, json.toJSON. I took my vectors, I converted it to an array, and then I outputted it to a file. And the file looks like this. Now, here's something. If I was to do this, and it's an array, but it's unnamed. How do I read this back in? This is not proper JSON file, right? The file name needs a name for the array typically. So let me go back and talk about this in a second. Okay, so what I really need, right, is if I was to write this out right now, it just writes out a flat, kind of file. That's what it does. So when I'm reading, when I'm writing out to a file, it just does this. But I really want an array of objects. So if I say something like Gson, to JSON array list, right? How do I do that? So serializing to serializing a list with Json. It talked about that. So here's something that we can actually look at. So here's my class. And again, we can see we kind of converted it as a list, okay, as an array, whatever. And I convert the list, as an example. Notice that this is my class. I'm making a couple of brand new objects and it converts it to an object. But the problem is when I read it back in, right? When I read it back in, it says ArrayList.class. And ArrayList is the way I want to read it back in to my list. Okay, so it's a list of type my class, and I want to read it from JSON from there and back in. Okay, that's what I want to do this. This is the problem, and it says here's an incorrect way of doing it. They say this is not the way to do it. And then the correct way to deserialize the list is the other way around, like we talked about. So it says type list of my class object is a type token of an array list my class, get type, like we saw in the documentation, which is this type, this way of doing it, okay? Where the collection, you can substitute collection with whatever you want, okay? And once we do this deserialization bit, we're going to deserialize from the object itself back into an object of type that we want it to be, okay, from JSON. I want to be able to do this, okay? And really, if you think about that, if I can write out the file that way, so I want to be able to write this file out as a, I can output this. It'd be nice if I can do it in the way that I want. So this is Json Reader. Json Reader actually does one thing at a time, and it reads the files. This is one way of doing it. And if I backtrack, there's also Json Writer. And Json Writer basically says, okay, so this is the data that I'd like to write. And here what I want to do is I make a new Json Writer of the output stream, right? Whatever that output stream is. And it says, they set an indent and, as an example. And then what they're going to do is they're going to, for every message in messages that they're going to get out, they want to write the message to the array, and they're going to do it step by step without serializing the data. That's what they're going to do here. And this is using the file, the Json Writer and Json Reader. But you can see that this is a long form way, or a very kind of nutty way of doing this. Wouldn't it be nicer if we didn't have to do this, and we can literally just write the file to JSON and read the file from JSON, and that's it, okay? How do we do it? So Json Writer, Json Reader looks a little bit ugly, and the reason why is because what it does is it says, I want to get the ID, and I want to actually get the value for that ID, and I want to make this writer.name, and I want to write this out in a certain way. One thing it doesn't do is it doesn't create here you can see that there is an array. It's going to write this out, but it's not going to write any curly braces, and it's not going to name the array anything. But if I can do this, right, and I can save myself some time, maybe there's another way of doing it. So this is where we get a little bit creative. Okay, so I want to be able to do this. I already got the data. Look, I'm able to do this, right? And we knew from before when we were doing save to file, we had this formatter, right? So kind of the exact same way, all right? But here we can do it in one step. We don't have to go loop through anything. We can just go JSON to JSON, take the array, convert it over, and we have an array of data. So we don't have to loop at all. Wouldn't it be nice if we can still use the formatter and not do this funky other thing that we can do? I'm just exploring stuff with you is what I'm saying, right? Wouldn't it be nice? And again, you can try it different ways. So what if I use this method instead, like what we did already? So instead of using file writer and extra data, what if we just did this? If I said, when I save stuff to JSON, I want to be able to use the new formatter that we've seen before. Okay, so this is our file formatter, right? And just like we did before with our save to file, instead of looping through, I want to output my format. Here's my output format. And can I not do the same thing? Can I not do the same thing? Where I just want to take that string and I want to output it. Something like what we did before, output.format. And then I want to pass in the JSON data here, this part right here. I want to take that whole piece here, and I want to use that here. That's kind of what I want to do. I don't want to have a format. I just want to output this format outwards. And if you notice, it says there's two parts. There's the string format and then any objects. So what if I said the string format is going to be this, and then the object was going to be this? So no formatting. It's going to output. Am I allowed to do that? Because %s really is typically a string of some kind. So here's my string, and I'm going to output it like this. Is that allowed? And if I can do this, right? If I can do this in one blow, then it saves me a lot of trouble. like it does it all in one. I don't have to do each individual. I could do it the other way around. I could make an array and then I can output it and I can format it the way I want to and so on. But it does kind of just saves me so much time to do it this way, right? Okay, so let's swap out these things all together. So we'll say, instead of save to file that I want to use, I'm going to use save JSON data to file. Let's see if I can do that. So, and how this is going to run is when I show my file dialog, and here where it says, save to file, I want to comment this out to test it out now. And I'm going to say save JSON data to file. We're going to swap out the different kind here. And this is inside of the show file dialog method. Okay. So I'm exploring stuff. I'm exploring stuff with you just like you would when you're doing some research. Okay, as an example. So here I'm active converting to an array, outputting the file, and does it do what I want it to do? And if it does, wonderful. Then we'll do it the other way around and read it. So let's try this out and run it. And what I want to do is I want to save file, and I want to call it something else instead of vector2d.txt. Let's look at all files, and we'll kind of select the JSON file, okay, and save, and press yes. And if everything goes well, then we'll have the JSON file, and it looked like it worked just perfectly. Take a look. Wrote out the file exactly like we wanted to. This is in JSON data. Awesome. So now that we have the file written out, we want to read the file on the way in. This is converting, we just did is convert our data from our database into JSON data. This is what we just did here, okay? Awesome, that's fantastic. Okay, excellent. So that's saved JSON data to file, and it worked. What if we just did the same thing with our reading data from the file, instead of doing all those funky tricks? But we know, let's also get rid of this just so we don't kill this. We know that if we're going to read it in, we need to read it in slightly differently than what we did before. So again, we can do the same thing. We can say Json is equal to a new Json file. That's it. We need that part. We don't need this part. We can use the same scanner that we used before, same idea, where we has next and kind of printed out everything that we want. So per line is what we want to do, because we're going to read, but this is only one big line is what it's going to be, right? So we're going to grab this piece here, and I want to remember we're going to read an array list of data, so kind of the same thing. So this is where we read stuff in, and for each file, what we want to do is when we're reading the data inbound, this is when we're printing it out from every input that we get. And we never did this before, where I want to save it as something. Okay, so we kind of want to use the same idea. So there's the scanner that we're getting in, as if we're reading one line at a time. The lines are going to be strings, right? So here's our string. We have our vector array. Nice. And when we read all the data in, this isn't the file format we're going to use. We're just going to read in a single piece of data, which is %s. And that data that we're going to get inbound, right, is the thing that we're going to read in. So this is the input that we're going to get. And instead of printing it out, I want to read it in. Okay, so input has next. Notice that input next float, I can go input.next, and there's also whatever the string pattern I want, or I can just say next, which is a string. So input.next is going to return a string, right? And input.next is going to return it somewhere. So let's think about this. Go back to our documentation. We have a string, okay? And we want to go from JSON. So JSON is the string. So JSON, it's going to look like this. JSON dot from JSON. And we're going to take that whole string, and then we're going to say at the bottom, that it's going to be some kind of collection type that we want, which means it's going to be an array list of vector2d. That's what we want, okay? That's the collection type that we want, a class of array list vector2d. And it says that, or dot class, I think it's got to be something. Vector2d, I think it is dot class. Dot class, I think it's something like this. Because we saw this idea, this deal, array list of vector2d class before, right? Because remember we went to, when we saw that serializing and deserializing of data, and we said that how do we read it in? From JSON, the input string that we got in, here's the input string, list of my class object, and list of my class object is the type, which is this, okay? Okay, let's go back. So it's going to be, here's the deserialization type, a type. I'm just going to make this up here like this. And let's see if we can do that by doing exactly this. So while we read it in, I'm going to say that the type of the collection that we're going to use is an array list of type vector2d. That's what we want. Type token is going to be something where we want to add that in. That's a new class we're going to add in. And so is this. All right. So those are the things we're going to have. And collection type is the type that we're going to use here. Okay. So we're going to say the collection type is a brand new type that we're defining. It's a little bit advanced here, but we're basically, we can call this whatever we want. So we're going to say that this is the array list type. So this is the array list type, okay? Or we can also say array list of type vector2d if you really want to be explicit, because that's really what we're doing. And we take this, and if we use this part here, that's what we want to load in. So we want to, when we deserialize, this is deserialization, right? Here's deserialization. We want to make a brand new array list, right? This array list of type vector2d, we want to read it in. And this is just the right side. And where do we read it into? We need to read it into something, a collection of the type that we want. So in other words, we need to do this piece here. That's what we want to kind of do, this one, an array list of vectors, and this array list of vectors is the thing that we want to read in to this. That's kind of what we want to do. But we're reading from a file, and we're saying, while the file has more stuff, we want input.next. Okay, while there's stuff to read, we're going to input.next. And we're only going to do this once because, well, we're going to get to the end of file pretty quick once we've done this. Once we do this one time, we're going to get to the file pretty quick and we're going to read it in, okay? How do we test that the serialization worked? Well, this is where we can do a for each loop, right, at the end, just to check it. We can say for each, and we know it's a range for loop, so var vector of vectors. And the thing is, we can't do vector of vectors because their vectors doesn't exist right here, right? So what we want to do is what we did earlier. Instead of doing this here, vectors is equal to this with an array list of vectors, what if we did this up here where we define vectors first, and we just overrode it after. So here we define, or we create an empty container of vectors. So we did. And here we're going to say it's an array list of vector2d type. Now there's one problem with this. For every vector in vectors, I'm just going to point this out to you in a second. For every vector in vectors, we want to system.out.println, and we want to print out that vector. That's our test to see if it's been full. Test, right? But there's a problem here. And the problem that we have is we know that the type token is not an array list. It's been saved as an array. That's the collection type. So going back to this, sure, we've saved it as it says the collection is an array as a list, right? And we've made a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is kind of what we have out there, right? We've converted it as a list, an array of integers, right? And when we bring it back in, when we kind of load it back in, instead of a collection of ints as arrays as a list, we have a list, right? So we're reading it back into the collection of that we want, right? And we know it's of list type that we're getting back in. So a collection of type integer, it's a collection of type vector 2Ds as an example. But at the end of the day, that collection type is the thing that we have to worry about. So will this work is the question. Because here we have, a list. Here's my class, a list. We convert it as a list, right? Once we have it, my list as, my class, my class input list as a list. Here's the list that's we've created. And here an array list is what we're saying of my class type, which we're getting inbound. So it looks the same. It looks like it's right. As an example, I'm just concerned, will it come in properly? Okay. So let's try this out and see if it works. So this is the read JSON data from file. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to just create an empty vector first. We're going to deserialize the data as it's coming from the file, and we're going to output each object separately. Let's see if it works. And to show you this, we know we can write to the file. If I want to read from the file, then notice it says read from file. We're just going to comment this one out. And we're going to say read JSON data from file. And that's the one we're going to use. So we're just swapping out the types. We're not monkeying with the data right now. Let's try this out and see what happens. All right, so we're going to open a file, and right now we're going to say all, and we're going to read this JSON data right here, and let's press open, and we're going to get, ta-da, all this data. Isn't that beautiful? So it worked perfectly. Okay, questions around how we did it, why it's working, how it's working, and all that kind of stuff. Because it's a little bit confusing, the steps that I took. So let's go over it one more time so you get it, because you're going to need to do this. It's coming up, right? And let's talk about it. So again, save to file is the old function we used to save data that's just regular data to the file. So we've serialized our own. We formatted it the way we wanted it, okay? One thing that needs to change, right? So instead of saving a to file, we said, let's save JSON data to file. So how do we do that? We still use the formatter because it's nice and easy, right? We created an array list from the data from our database, and we stored it here in vectors. And to show you what this looks like when we read it out, we system.out.println so we can see what it looks like, okay? And then we said output.format, and we just outputted it as a string. That's all we did. We took our JSON to JSON, we took our vectors, which is this, and we cast it as an array. So it's just an array of vector objects. That's what we did. And we output it to the file. So that's what this does. It also shows us what it's going to output. This is kind of our test to show us what the output's going to look like before we do it. When we read it in, before we used to read in each object, and there used to be objects on different lines. Here, all of our objects are on the same line, okay? Now, we can make it look pretty if we really wanted to. Instead of using Gson, we could use Json Builder and do it to pretty. We can do it, write it to pretty and read it in pretty. Okay, it's up to you. I think it's just better to read it in a flat file like this. Okay, that's kind of saving one big file We're using a scanner just as if the user's entering the data, right? And just the exact same way when we're deserializing, the only thing is we're following the documentation and we're saying, okay, I want to make an array list of vectors that I'm going to store the data in. For in the beginning, it's empty. That's what this array list is. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to create a new type. And this comes from it's a super interface that we're going to use, right? And the new type, we just called it an array list of type vector2d. That's what I named it. And that's a new type token. This comes right from our Google folks for Json. And basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a vector2d and I'm instantiating it and getting the type for this one, and I'm assigning it to this new array list of type vector2d. Because remember, from JSON needs some kind of class. And this isn't a class. This is a whole collection of objects, right? And so I'm taking this collection of objects. When I'm reading in the data, and I'm only going to read one piece of data because there isn't anything else to read, I'm taking it in and I'm storing it in my vectors. I'm replacing my empty container with the array list that I'm getting from the file. And here I'm outputting it so we can see it. Back to regular way of looking at it, okay? So that's what it does. One thing to note is it'd be nice if not only can we look at our file chooser, our extension filter, shouldn't just be using text objects, but also we should also be able to see JSON objects. Let's select that. So not just text, but also JSON files. And we can say star.json is what it's going to look like. And it's going to be star.json here. And because for this week, we're making it so I can do JSON files first, then I'm going to put it the first thing on the array. When I make the array of strings that it's going to put into the file chooser, it's going to use JSON files first. Okay, so we can see those as well as text files. Otherwise, it's going to look pretty ugly and all that kind of stuff. Let's try this out and see if it works. So again, if I open it up, then if I want to save a file, it's going to say, okay, cool, what do I want to save? By the way, the vector2d.txt, I can see the JSON file right there. And let me just change the name. So one thing we did last week was we also said that set the initial file name to vector2d.txt. Let's set the initial file name this week to vector2d.json. So we can kind of come up with a default name for us. And let's try it again. So we'll press play, and we can see that I want to click Save File, and now it's suggesting vector2d.json. Let's make it something else. We'll call it vector2d, version 2, right? Vector2d-version2.json. So we know, or we'll just call it, instead of version 2, we'll say new. Okay, so we know that this is the old one, and I kind of wrote it by hand. But I want to prove to you that this is working by, say, vector2d-new.json and click Save. And if everything goes well, then it shows us the data. And if we go to the project, right, we can see that down in here, there's a vector2d-new.json. If I double click on it, you can see the data that's been nicely written there. Okay? And one thing to note is that it's written in ID order, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on. All right, nice. What about when I want to read it? Let's go back to that. I want to read it in. I'm going to open the file. It says I can open whatever file I want. I'm going to open up this one. And then that's the new file I just wrote. And I'm going to click Open. And then it should, if everything goes well, show me the file here, in my terminal window. That's what it should show me. So where does it do that? I probably closed it off. Let's do that again. Sorry. Ta-da. Okay, and run it. There it is. And I want to open the file, like I said here, and press open, and there it is. There's the data. Now the data is not sorted, right? And remember, I can sort the data with a single command because it's an array list, and I can sort array lists by clicking, just saying array list.sort before I output it. So to change that, going back to our data here, let's go to file chooser. Remember what we did last time in the when I read the file. Here's I read the file and I outputted it. When we saved the file, when it was going outbound, I sorted it first before I saved it. So let's do it again, and we'll do a vector 2D sort before we save it. All right, so I want to do this, and I want to do this here. So I read the table, and before I do anything with it, I want to take my vectors and I want to sort them. I want to sort the vector. Remember, the sorting works where I already have a comparer that I created last week, and I can sort it so that it's sorted in magnitude order, okay? And then that magnitude order is going to be saved to file the way we want to. Let's try it again. So run it. And I want to save to file. I want to save the file as vector2d.new. We know this is going to overwrite the one we already have. And it's showing me what it's going to look like. And this time it's going to save it in magnitude order. And we can see that because it's 1 and then 8 and then 9 and then 2 and then 4. Notice that these are the IDs of the objects, right? Cool. Then I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to open it up in that right order. And now you can see that it's sorted in magnitude order. Nice. That's your ice for this week. I know that was long, and I went through a lot of little iterations for you guys, but the reason why I wanted to do that was to kind of go through and explore different ways of doing the same thing and make it easy for you guys to do it. There's one more way we're going to do it next week, where we actually have another interface that we can use to do the same thing in one kind of line, a one-liner to do everything. But this week I wanted to explore this way. How do I read it in and do something with it? Okay. A couple of things to note. Just to end off today, let's put this up on GitHub first of all. So we'll say clear git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say replaced read and write functions for JSON data. Git push. I know, I'm sorry. I know I could have done way more. It's not a lot. I've been a little bit lazy today. I'm trying not to do so many. All right, because I wanted to kind of iterate on how to figure out how to do this thing with you guys, as an example. And we kept our old functions just that way you can compare the old stuff with the new stuff and see what the difference is. Okay. But a couple things to note that I've given you. I've given you a couple of things up on line 2. So if you look at inside of our week 9, I've also given you something called Epiphany. This is neat because next week we're going to explore some APIs. APIs without a key, which is kind of cool. So if I look at Epiphany, a huge list of public APIs for testing, because we're going to actually read it from instead of reading it from our database, we're going to actually read our data from an API. Right, so up on the web, which is kind of a neat way of doing it. So here's the link for you to try it out, to go there. This is some preview for next week. And you can see that there are the top 15 APIs without a key or authentication, and there's cat facts. Here's one. And if I actually go to cat facts, let's just go to that one for a second, number 2. And if I look at it, you can see that it gives us this fact, right? Myakis, the primitive ancestor of cats, was a small tree-living creature of the late Eocene period from 45 to 50 million years ago. And if I refresh, it's going to give you another random fact about cats. Okay, and if I refresh again, another one. And notice that the format is going to be fact, that's the key, and the value is going to be this, and then the length is going to be another key, property of length, and how many characters in length it is. And if I keep refreshing, it's going to give me a random fact every single time. This is an API. Okay, and it's a free API that we can download it. We can get this. We can fill this up. We can change our user interface so that it reads any API we want. So that's cat facts. There's some other ones, and the really neat ones. As an example, there's a random user, fake users, random universities, all the universities. that are out there. There's an IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, and there's also a movie database, which is an alternative. And the alternative is, of course, not working. Sometimes these things die. Let's go to this one. So here is, the Imdb API, okay, unofficial. And so how do we use this one, and where is the API, kind of in here, right? So it kind of talks about how this thing is working and how it's, kind of put together. I don't know. I think this is too complex for us. Let's keep looking at some other ones. Maybe there's some other information that we can kind of look at as well. So again, these are all for entertainment APIs. Let's see if there's one. So that's the unofficial one. Hearthstone, meme generator. Okay, there's one, a meme generator. Cool. All right, so let's see what this is. Here's our meme generator API. And the way it would work is, as an example, we have, oh no, this requires a key. So we don't want a key. We want no key. Tic-tac-toe. Want it so that we can just get the same. No, this is, again, a key that's required. We don't want a key. We want something like this. We want something like where the random user is going to kind of create, kind of the random user, and here's the results, right? Notice that this is an object, right? And the object has a curly brace on the outside, and it has an array on the inside. Okay, so this is kind of notice that this is kind of proper JSON data, all right? So you want to be able to kind of view an API, and here's the universities. A good thing is when they have little links like this. So here's example, all the universities, and notice it just starts with the square brackets, and then it says domains, the web pages, state, province, and then the name, Marywood University, the countries in the United States, and so on. And that would be the first object. This whole thing is the first object, in the university's API. Okay, so it looks pretty messy and stuff like this. Okay, meme generator. I know it's kind of neat. Zip codes. These are all the zip codes, for, so postcode is 33162, countries United States, country abbreviation is US, places is Miami, longitude and longitudes, longitude and latitude. And if I refresh, it's going to give me another one, as an example. So if I go back to this and I do it again, oops, does it give me, let's see if it does it. No, it doesn't exist. But there's other. You can check for a postal, you can have a postal code, and it'll give it to you. I'm pretty sure. Let me just go back to that, and yes, it gives you whatever the zip code is, and it'll give you that thing. But we want something like this where we click onto it. We don't want complications. We want to just click on something and get, an API for travel or whatever. And next week, what we want to be able to do is read in, this stuff. So here is weather. It says get access to current weather data or historical weather data with this free API for the weather, but this weather API requires a key. So this does require a key, and so on. A URL shortener service, IP geolocation. As an example, COVID-19 data. Let's see if that's down. Of course it is. Some of these, again, whenever you're looking at sites that are free, you never know when some of these things are going to die, right? So that's the kind of stuff. So this is one example, and we want to be able to tap into something like this as an example when we're testing. And I'm going to give you an API that I want you guys to use for your assignment. Okay, so I'm going to give you one API, and you're just going to go and use it. All right. But kind of neat, as an example, APIs without a key or authentication. So here's one. This is API, publicapis.org. And these are a bunch of all the APIs. It's an API of APIs, which is kind of neat, all right? So that's kind of one thing. And we saw Catfax, and CoinDesk is the Bitcoin price index in real time. I wonder if it's going to show us this. There we go. So July 15th, and then it's showing us the the floating rate, which is 19,877 euros, which is pretty crazy for a Bitcoin, right? Insane. Okay, so really kind of cool stuff. We're going to go into this again, and what we want to use is something like a, instead of using this, maybe we can find is a movie database that is free. And there is a free movie database as an example. And I believe it's an omdbapi.com, but that one requires an API key, if I'm not wrong. So if I was to do that, if I go to omdb, API.com, if I'm not wrong, yeah, this one requires an API key, right? But what it does is it's kind of an online movie database, and you put in your key, and then it gives you all the parameters. It's very, very well documented. So it talks about the, kind of all the information that it's going to give you, and you can kind of use this to read the API or the data into your own model, okay, which is what we want to get to eventually. I know I'm going over time, guys. Please bear with me, and I'll explain to you how this works. So let's suppose I have an API key. So, and I want to search for something. So here's my API key. And once I put my API key and whatever the data that I want is, so something like this, oh, not Cat Ninja. Let's see if this works. So I want to kind of put something in like, I don't know, and then the search term, like for example, where I want to say something like Star Wars, right? And then it will look through the database, and it'll give me stuff back that is all about Star Wars, right? And it'll even give me the images for all the data that we have here. So take a look at that. Now this is with an API. I'm borrowing an API from my other partner, right? So we can see this. We're going to make our own API, and this is kind of what it does. It returns data back, and look what it gives you. It gives you the title, the year, the IMDb ID, the type, which is a movie, the poster, which is where you can find the poster of what it looks like. If you actually do this right now, if I take this little link here and go over to the side, I can actually look at the poster, and this is Star Wars. This is the actual Star Wars poster, right? And then the title, which is Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, right? And the year, 1980, and then there's another poster. You can see that it gives us all the posters for all the Star Wars movies, right? There's a Star Wars movie, right? So that's something we can do. And instead of doing Star Wars, so here's our API key, and instead of putting in Star Wars here, we can put in any movie you want, like Thor. And then if we look at Thor, you can see that there is a bunch of Thor movies, right? That's here, and this would be a great way of kind of importing and kind of searching through our data, converting the data into a model for like a movie model, and then kind of outputting something to our some kind of interface that we're going to create where we can see the data, the name of the movie, and so on that comes inbound. Okay, so this idea is the same idea that you're going to use for your assignment 3 and 4. Okay, that's what it's going to be. You're going to read an API. You're going to create the model class that is going to work with the API. This model is very simple. It has only a title, a year, an IMDb ID, a type, and the poster kind of image, what that poster image is. That's all it has, okay? And if I can get that information, then I can input it inside of my UI. Okay, so kind of very simple. So that is the OMDB API. And there's other ones out there that require an API key that we can sign up for, weather, and a bunch of other ones we can test out starting next week. Okay, so that's kind of a preview of what we're going to do. Again, one more thing, guys. Please don't forget to download and install Android if you haven't done it already. I'm saying it again because it's an opportunity for you guys to do it before time, so that when we get to it, it's already installed and we can configure it together. Okay. Questions around the stuff that we covered today. So again, stuff we covered today was JSON, serializing to serializing objects. We went into a lot of detail. We used Gson, which was a tool, and we used Maven, to kind of to get all the dependencies for it. We created instances of Vector2D class from the JSON data, and we saved it to file. Again, this week, there's no lab report required for ICE 8, just to make it easy for you guys. And I'm putting together assignment 3 and 4 data, which I will release soon. No, I'm going to release it, probably tomorrow, Wuhan, with a little bit of a video, right? Which is going to tell you what I need, instead of wasting our kind of going through it today. Okay. Okay. Any questions before we go for the day? Okay, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully you got something out of this, as an example, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again next week. Thank you.